We spoke last time on the stress response in the body, and I gave you some basic outline about the physician who first worked on that. He was an endocrinologist, a Hungarian-born endocrinologist named Hans Selye, and he outlined a very salient explanation of how the body responds to stress, known as general adaptation syndrome. So there are many factors that come into play when we look at the body's response to stress, but today I'm going to choose to focus on an area in which we have the most control, or pretty near the most control over the stress we encounter, and that is dietary stress. Okay? We'll be using some terms that you're familiar with, but I want to do it in a fashion that is very understandable and where we can get some traction on ways we can make changes in our lives to benefit. So let me just give a quick outline in terms of what I mean by dietary stress. When the body's presented with food to digest and extract energy from, that food is measured in regards to its caloric content. And so a calorie is just an energy measurement. It's actually the quantity of heat needed to generate 1 degree Celsius increase in energy. To heat 1 gram of water to include that. So that's the scientific explanation of what that means, but what's the take-home message when we look at calories, and are all calories created equal? And I can tell you, as I beg that question, that they are not, in fact. So when we look at the caloric content of food and how this affects our physiology and as a result the stress response, it's very common to hear it said that the objective would be to avoid carbohydrates. The carbohydrates are the enemy. And there are many diets that have been set up around this concept. Okay, everybody's familiar with Dr. Atkins. Probably that was very popular a decade ago, maybe a decade and a half ago. More recently, we have the paleo diet. These are two examples of diets that control carbohydrate intake. But what's the reason for that? What's the reasoning behind that? And is there efficacy in doing so? And the answer is yes, but with limitations. So let me start out by saying that the 3 main categories that foods fall into that we need to understand are that we have fat, carbohydrate, and protein. Okay? And the breakdown of those 3 entities, those are just, think of them as storage mediums for energy. Okay? Fat is an exceptionally, we think of fat as a taboo word. No, it's exceptionally efficient. Fat is an exceptionally efficient way to deliver energy. In fact, I'm getting thumbs up for that, right? That's good. I'm delivering good information here. We have more cheese. So we have 9 calories contained within 1 gram of fat, as compared to carbohydrates and proteins, which 1 gram of either of those entities yields 4 calories. Okay, so fat is 2 times plus more efficient in terms of its delivery of energy. And I just explained that protein and carbohydrates both are equal. They both have 4 calories per unit volume. The difference lies in the way the body metabolizes those entities. Because if we consume a carbohydrate in a pure form, which table sugar would be a good example of this, sucrose, which is table sugar, if we consume that, it's metabolized instantly by our body. It results in an instant increase in our blood sugar level. And in fact, if we want to really talk about a measurement that would be very valid in looking at for our health and wellness, the amount of glycemic response or increase in our blood sugar is really the measure that's going to yield the most value for us. Okay? So a gram of pure table sugar is 4 calories, not much. But that is metabolized instantly into energy for your body. A gram of protein, let's say a turkey burger, 1 gram of turkey burger, mostly protein there is some fat. That is going to be metabolized over a much longer period of time by the nature of the way our digestive system works. Okay? So when one sits down in the morning and eats a bowl of oatmeal, for instance, which is a healthy breakfast for all intents and purposes, that contains fiber, which is non-digestible. Think of it as interference, basically. It interferes with digestion, and so in doing so, it slows the process. Okay? So if we consume a bowl of oatmeal, that has a large quantity of carbohydrates in it. Some of them are immediately accessible by the body and will spike the blood sugar. Others are in the form of fiber, and we can't get to that. We literally don't have the enzymes to break it down, and therein lies some of the benefits. It provides roughage for our digestive system, and it also slows the absorption of all that sugar. So the fact that it's bound between undigestible fiber and the carbohydrates actually slows the absorption of that carbohydrates. That makes it much less stressful for the body. So let me tie this all back in. That the process of spiking the blood sugar initiates a stress response for the body. It's literally a stress response that will initiate what can be measured as a fight or flight response. It's small in grade as compared to a car accident, for instance, something that's very stressful for us. But if one eats in a fashion that's not balanced, okay, and consumes a larger quantity of carbohydrate-rich foods without the balance of the protein and fat in there, it induces a stress response. And when done 3 times a day, if you only eat 3 meals a day, or 5 times a day if you're snacking in between meals, the cumulative effect is one which has a profound effect on your overall well-being. In fact, I belong to a group called St. Louis Institute of Integrative Medicine, and within that group, there's a cardiologist I had a conversation with. And he shared with me that the difference between some of the patients he deals with who have cardiovascular issues and those who show up and get cleared, they might be referred to him and then are cleared as not having those issues, lies in the fact that some of them eat a diet that induces the stress, okay? And the result of this stress in the body is what we see as chronic inflammation, okay? Time magazine about 1.5 years ago on the front cover had inflammation as being the new health concern. Well, the inflammatory response in the body is what initiates all healing. We need it to happen. We bump our arm, get a bruise, fall down. The response that happens in the body, that inflammation, is what begins that healing process. But eating foods that induce rapid fluctuations in the blood sugar consistently actually put the body in a pro-inflammatory state, which it doesn't really shift out of. And therein lies the issue with both the stress response and the response of the body towards inflammation. It's that for these processes to be engaged, do their work, and then disengaged, that's exactly how it's intended to work. But when it's engaged continuously, it's disruptive, it's actually depleting to the body. So we'll take a step back. So we've got carbohydrates here, we've got proteins here, and then fats over here. Now I'm going to use an analogy here that might sound kind of funny. Came up with this one. It's either going to work or not. You all can let me know. I have a 4-year-old daughter, and I bought her a Slinky recently. Wonderful toy. She loves it, and even at 4, she gets the idea. So the Slinky came packaged in a box, just big enough for the Slinky. Once removed from the box and played with for a while, the Slinky then got put into her toy chest, and the Slinky is now interwoven with every other toy she has, right? So let's imagine for just a moment that these Slinkies, this is just an analogy that fits very well, these Slinkies we're going to use in their different states as the different foods that we eat. So the Slinky that's out of the package is a carbohydrate. It's ready to be played with, it's immediately accessible, and we're going to gain benefit immediately from it. The Slinky that's packaged in its little carton is actually a protein. It requires some work to get to it to yield the benefit of having that entity, but once you get there, you can get to it. It takes a little more time. And then there's, I assume, I've never worked at a Slinky factory, but there's probably a master carton that a 12-pack or 24-pack of those Slinkies come in, and that would be a fat, okay? So this room represents our digestive system, okay? Digestive system, and the Slinky is the unit of energy, which is glucose. It's the common currency on which our body operates. And when I'm counseling people on nutrition, this is a common question. Does everything break down to a common entity, or when we eat fat, does it go into our body and get stored, for us guys, as fat? And the answer is this, that everything is broken down into that common currency, which is glucose. It's just how the body manages that and how quickly that conversion takes place. Okay, so back to the Slinkies. The equivalent of drinking a soda or even a glass of orange juice is the equivalent to opening that door and shoveling in 2,000 Slinkies into this room all at once. It's mass chaos, and if our job were if this were the logistics area, the shipping area for the Slinkies, and we needed to get those Slinkies out to trucks, that would be almost too much to deal with. They'd all be intertwined, they wouldn't be in their boxes, and dealing with all these Slinkies, we would be better off just opening the door and shoveling them out into a big bag, okay? That's just storage. If the Slinkies would come in each in their individual cartons in a protein form, that'd be much easier. We could each grab a few, create little stacks, and slide them into areas along the walls where they could be wheeled out with carts. That's a much easier way to deal with the Slinkies, and now we can actually, in a productive way, get them shipped out. If they come in master cartons, that's highly efficient. That would be the fat delivery system. So these are packaged very well. A lot of the end product is in every unit volume carton, and we can move those very easily out in order to use them for energy. Here's the difference. When we get hit with all the Slinkies that are out of their boxes and interwoven and intertwined, instead of us being able to deal with those and use them productively to sell them as the Slinky manufacturer, we don't have time to deal with that, and so they actually just get pumped into storage. And the equivalent there is the conversion of raw carbohydrates, a lot of sugars, getting pumped into storage in our body, which is fat. So therein lies the connection. If I eat 400 calories from a high sugar content, let's say, I'm not picking on anyone here, any breakfast. I have a sweet tooth that I would rival anybody's in the room, okay? But when here, sometimes I have to really steer myself away from the Danishes because I crave that. We consume something like that, it's very quickly converted to sugar by the body. Okay, there's a fat content there that actually slows it down, but that's very rapidly assimilated into the blood sugar, into the blood as energy in glucose sugar. The body can only use so much of that caloric content right there in the moment. Your metabolism is requiring a given amount, depending on your activity level, just to run the processes in the body. But anything above and beyond that that's immediately available in the blood needs to be stored, okay? And the more rapid the rise in blood sugar, the more quickly the body needs to get that out of the system into storage. And there are quite a few metabolic processes in play here. Insulin is a very important key that helps open the doors to these cells. But effectively, we have an unlimited capacity to open the door and shove the Slinkies out into a large bag, and that is stored fat. Okay? We have an unlimited capacity to store fat. We can see that in our society. So the issue is, if I eat that 400 calories in a carbohydrate form, a lot of it has to go to storage because it ramps up the blood sugar very rapidly, and it's not metabolically safe for us to have our blood sugar out of control like that. So the body deals with it. In dealing with that, though, and especially if it happens multiple times per day, then amplified over weeks and months and years, that is a stress on the body that rivals any other stress we can encounter and probably overcomes any other stress we can encounter in terms of its impact on our health and longevity. Okay, so that's 400 calories eaten in the form of sugar. A lot of it goes into storage. When I eat that in the form of a protein-rich food, like a steak, for instance, a good, healthy, grass-fed, organic steak, I'll say. If I eat that, it takes much longer to metabolize or get to that energy. There's still 400 calories there. It's the same exact amount. We can measure it out and consume the same amount as we did in the sugar form or the carb-rich form. But in this case, the process of breaking down those amino acids that are in the protein into the common currency, it's going to the same thing, to glucose, takes much longer. And that longer time for the body to deal with it yields a more stable blood sugar response, and therein lies the benefit to controlling the carbohydrates in the diet. Now, I will take a quick moment. I just have a few more minutes here, but I will take a quick moment to describe another factor that comes into play, and that is folks like myself get up and speak of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins as if they're completely separate entities and you're going to make a choice to eat one or the other. The fact is, all foods have a blend of these various factors. In fact, one of the best ways to get a good carbohydrate-rich diet and beneficial carbohydrates is consume a lot of vegetables. Carrots, broccoli, great sources of carbs. And those aren't bad carbs. If we look at the example I gave earlier of the oatmeal, for instance, the fiber that's in that oatmeal actually slows the uptake of the carbohydrates because that is a very carb-rich meal, but it's one of the safer carb-rich meals we can eat. And the reason is because that fiber actually obstructs physically the process of digestion. And so eating in the form of whole fruits and whole vegetables, your carbohydrates, you can take in the same quantity of sugar It's just metabolized very differently by the body, and as a result, stored very differently by the body, and as a result, stresses the body in a very different way. So when we consider the best way to go about reducing stress, what I offer to my patients and what I mention every time I'm speaking to somebody about nutrition is consider breakfast, for instance, as the way you're going to set your day. It's not that we don't want to have a glass of orange juice with breakfast, but the concept of understanding the amount of carbohydrate contained in what you're eating and making sure it's buffered with longer burning forms of energy. Okay, so an excellent breakfast would include eggs. We were told for a long time to avoid taking in large quantities of cholesterol in the form of eggs. We now understand there's a very poor correlate between cholesterol consumption in our food and then our cholesterol level in our body. If we don't take in enough cholesterol in what we eat, our liver is going to produce massive amounts of it. I have a very close family member who doesn't eat any cholesterol whatsoever, and he's on a statin drug to control his cholesterol level. It's a factor we now understand. We were chasing the wrong entity when we were just looking at cholesterol. But I could speak for hours on that. I'll pause for just a second and say a protein-rich breakfast like eggs, like you could go with vegetable sources, would be brown rice. Okay, it is a grain, but the brown husk on the outside of that is a fibrous entity that contains not just protein in that husk, but also slows the absorption of the rice itself. So brown rice farina cereals, it's like a cream of wheat, but made out of rice. And consider high-quality fats. High-quality fats in the diet are integral, and so organic butter is actually the healthiest thing we could be eating in place of, say, margarine. Even if it says it's just like butter, or it tastes like butter, or acts like it. It was a vegetable oil that had to be solidified in some way, and the process of that becoming solidified does interfere with the metabolism of that entity. So what I want you to take away from today is that when Hans Selye described general adaptation syndrome, he was talking about how a biological entity, a human being, responds to its environment and the stressors. And I want you to take away that what we choose to put in our bodies in the form of energy, the food that we eat, is probably the single biggest thing directly in our control in how to control that stress response and as a result inflammation on the body. And anybody interested in more information, please contact me. I love sharing this info. So thanks for your attention.